right, guys, welcome back. This is Faye.
This is Nick.
And this is Creogs over coffee. All right, guys, so today we have back with us Michael Foley, and today he's going to be talking to us about house purchases. So, Michael, welcome back. What are our learning objectives for today?
Awesome. Thanks so much again for having me. So today we want to learn all about house purchases and how to determine affordability of a house purchase. So how much can we actually afford? And today we'll break it into two components to determine affordability of a house purchase, and then talk about some risks to consider throughout the house purchasing process. And then we'll finish it up with two questions to ask before pulling the trigger on a house purchase.
Awesome. So as always, we have a disclosure that we're going to read for Michael. So Michael is a comprehensive financial advisor who runs his practice out of Scottsdale, Arizona under North Star Resource Group. Michael was trained at Duke University and holds his certified financial planner designation alongside his certified student loan professional designation. Michael is the son of two doctors and has found a specialty in working with those in the healthcare space with their financial and student loan needs. Michael also runs a YouTube channel called Lifestyle Creep, designed to give healthcare workers simple strategies to be more intentional in their finances and live more humble and quiet lives. And Michael is an investment advisor, representative of Cetera Advisor Networks LLC, securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks LLC, member of FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisers LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity and is located at 6720 North Scottsdale Road, Suite 290 in Scottsdale, Arizona, 85253. All right, Michael, so start us off. You said that the first thing you wanted to talk to us was about these two components to consider for the affordability of a house purchase. So what should we be considering before we buy a house?
Absolutely. So, the two big components that we got to look at to really try to simplify this, because there's so many different ways to look at it, right? But I really like to simplify it as, can you afford the down payment and can you afford the monthly payment, period, right? That's what we got to look at. So we'll start with talking about the down payment. So normal rules for putting, how much you got to put down on a house is typically you have to put 20% down on a house. And so if you're a normal buyer, you had to put 20% down on the house, and then you can get access to a mortgage. However, if you don't put 20% down, typically you have to pay what's called a private mortgage insurance. So this is saying, the bank kind of wants some skin in the game for you. And so if you're not able to put that 20% skin in the game, then it makes them a little bit nervous to make sure that, are you really on the hook for this? And so what they do is they take out an insurance policy for you, and you have to pay that insurance policy in case you were to default on that loan. Because again, it's a little bit more of a risk if you're not putting that full 20% down. So you can put all the way down to typically 3.5% down on a home, using a conventional loan. But again, you'll have to, the less you put down, the more in private mortgage insurance you'd have to be paying. Okay. Now, for our physician clients, we also have access to the doctor loan programs. And so many of the different banks will offer these doctor loan programs. And what they've identified is that doctors as a demographic, have pretty consistent job security and consistent income, and so they're as a demographic, you guys are very good debtors, right? A lot of the physician clients of banks don't just default on their loans, right? And so they actually allow you to put all the way down to 0% down in some of these situations without having to pay this extra private mortgage insurance. Okay, so it does, some of the banks, by putting all the way down to 0% down, yes, you don't have to pay the private mortgage insurance, but we do see some of the banks do tick up the interest a little bit when compared to conventional loans. So we usually encourage folks to shop it out with the doctor loans and without the doctor loans. But even still, it's becoming a little bit harder to justify putting, 0% down in this interest rate environment when, we're seeing 6, 7, 8% interest on, 30-year fixed mortgages. And so we're typically ideally trying to target at least like 5 to 10% down. Because the other risk that we run when we put 0% down is, we also have the risk of going underwater in the house, meaning that you owe more than the house is worth. Because let's just say, for example, you buy a house for $600,000 and, let's say the market trends sideways and you need to sell that house. well, even if it doesn't even go up or down in value, if you finance 600,000 and the house is worth 600,000, well, just to sell the house, you typically have to pay like 6% in realtor fees to just get the house sold. And so therefore you're already having to come up out of pocket just to sell the house. And so as a general rule, we always like to have a guaranteed way to pay off this debt, and meaning that we don't want to be in an underwater position because it really could jeopardize things very quickly, especially if you do need to sell or move at that place. So that's just something to be thinking about with how much to put down. But then also we have to factor in closing costs. So when we're looking at closing costs, a lot of people think, okay, well, I'm going to put 10% down, on X number dollar house. And so I can figure out what the math is on that. But a lot of times we don't factor in that there's going to be other closing costs associated with that mortgage. And so with the closing costs could be up to like 2% of the cost of the house as well. And so, maybe on like a $500,000 house, you might be paying, another 15 grand on top of that. And so if we're anticipating that, hey, we're going to put $50,000 down on the house, well, actually, that's probably going to be $65,000 that you're going to have to come up with out of pocket if you want to put that 10% down, right? And so we got to make sure that we're factoring in the closing costs onto that. So, really one of the things that we got to be thinking of, okay, how much are we putting down? Are we factoring in the closing costs? Before I go on, the one thing that just a cool trick that you might be able to think about with the closing costs is I talked to your realtor about seller concessions, because there are some instances in some of the really hot markets, it's not something that a lot of realtors are able to incorporate in the offer. But sometimes what they're able to do is actually add like 2% of seller concessions, meaning that they are essentially giving you extra money, which allows you to essentially finance the cost of the closing costs. So let's say, essentially if you buy the house for 500,000, they can say, hey, we'll sell it to you for 515, and you'll be able to get the mortgage for 515. Therefore, you're financing those closing costs throughout the 30-year mortgage. So it can help kind of alleviate some of the upfront costs for you, especially as we're trying to figure out how much we can afford. But not available in all situations, but definitely something to ask your realtor about for sure. But the big thing is with how much we can put down, to determine how much we're able to do is we have to make sure that we're able to maintain an emergency reserve after the down payment and closing costs. So, one of the biggest mistakes that we see our clients make is that they don't have an emergency reserve after the purchase. They save up X number of dollars in their savings, and then they deplete it all, and they're left with a couple $1,000 after the house purchase. And now, in a situation where, now we're exposed to a lot higher liabilities, that's a big concern because, for example, like when my wife and I moved into our house, we made sure we had an emergency reserve, and I'm sure glad we did, because the first month that we owned this place, I kid you not, we had to replace the entire roof. And so the whole roof was...
No.
Yeah, the whole roof was literally, I think it was like $15,000 that we had to pay for a new roof, which is, very realistic, cost for moderate roof costs. And so if we didn't have an emergency reserve in place, that would have gone onto credit cards. And so that's something that we got to make sure that we don't go into home ownership where a lot of other things could go wrong without having that emergency buffer. So really to determine the affordability from a down payment standpoint is how much can we put down and still maintain that maybe 3 to 6 months of emergency reserve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talked about the down payment now. Let's go on and talk a little bit too about the monthly payment, because that's obviously a big factor in whether or not we can afford this house, how much we're paying every month, and what goes into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the monthly payment is something that oftentimes a lot of people, when you're running calculators online, don't fully understand. And so I want to break it down because the mortgage payment is broken up into 4 key areas. And so they call it PITI or PITI. And what that stands for is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And so the problem is when you go on Google and you Google, mortgage calculator, what's going to come up is a mortgage calculator that factors those first 2, the principal and the interest. And so when you get a mortgage payment, you're like, oh, I can afford that. But then when you actually go in to figure out what the mortgage costs, and they factor in taxes and insurance, well, that's maybe not going to be the same number anymore, right? Well, it's definitely not going to be the same number. And so when we're looking at that, don't just run those online calculators without factoring in those, the taxes, the estimated insurance, and also if you're going to a place that has an HOA or homeowners association, that's also going to be factored into that. And so sometimes there's a lot of different like Zillow or Realtor, some of them on their sites now incorporate a true mortgage calculator on there that factors in the estimated taxes for that property based off of like a historical perspective, and for that specific property, and an estimate for what insurance might cost. That is a much better resource to lean on for what that mortgage cost would be for you, instead of just looking at just a mortgage calculator online that isn't factoring in those taxes, insurance, and other HOA costs. Okay. But also something to be thinking about too, because even just different area codes, or zip codes that, when you're looking at different properties, the taxes can be substantially different between properties. And so that's something that we should also be factoring into on that monthly payment. But, so that's kind of explaining what that is. But when you go to a bank and you say, hey, I'm interested in looking at a mortgage, what they're going to do is they're going to tell you how much you qualify for. And so the biggest mistake we see people making on the monthly payment side is that people equate what you qualify for as to, you take that as them telling you what you can afford. And that is not the same number. Now, what you can qualify for and what you can afford are vastly different, and in most situations. And so, what you qualify for is simply what the bank would risk on your situation. That's not necessarily, they don't know anything about the other areas of your finances, right? And so, what they typically will do is they take your gross income, so all your pre-tax income, and then they subtract out all of your debt payments that you're already committed to, and they divide it by 2. That's what you qualify for from a monthly payment. So your PI, TI, your principal, interest, taxes, insurance for your mortgage has to be under that 50% as a general rule. Okay. So that's something that is, it's simply how they calculate that. So does that mean that you can afford it? Well, not necessarily. It just means that they'll allow you to take out that much if you wanted to. And it's astounding how much a lot of clients are able to qualify for, that we would absolutely not recommend from a financial planning standpoint. But our CFP board, our Certified Financial Planner board, gives some guidelines for percentages that are sometimes helpful in kind of gauging true affordability. And so they recommend that 28% of your take-home income be what it would be for your housing payment. So your your mortgage payment should be under 28% of your take-home. So if you're, just make numbers easy, if you're bringing home $10,000 a month, your mortgage payment should be under about $2,800 a month, right? The other one that slots into there is the total debt payments. So when we factor in our student loans or car payments or any other things, all of our debt payments should be, including our mortgage, should be under 36% of our take home. So between the 28 and the 36% rule, that helps give you a guide. They're not law, they're kind of guides, right? But if we are going over those certain percentages, it's fine. We see that, right? But we got to know where else are we taking from in the other areas of the plan, because we can't be just, it's just saying that you value having that more of a home as a part of your budget than something else in your area of your plan, and that's totally fine. But we can't go over what we have to take home, right? And so we got to be thoughtful there. But and just some statistics that we found on kind of mortgage payments for most millionaires in the U.S. According to the Millionaire next door, most millionaires have a mortgage payment between 5 and 20% of their income. So that's the CFP board is recommending under 28%. Most millionaires have a mortgage payment between 5 and 20%. So you can see that they're actually undercutting that quite a bit, which is just something to be thoughtful of as you're diving through this, as we don't want you being in a house poor situation by any means, right? So one other thing to consider is just, what is your fallback option if we do go underwater in the house, right? Meaning that we owe more than the house is worth. And there's a lot of situations like that where we could, we have to sell the house. And so oftentimes when we look at, our mortgage payment from a standpoint of, okay, well, what are our options? What would this property potentially rent out for, right? Because if we needed to sell this house, so let's say you move to somewhere and you put 0% down on the house, and maybe you are underwater in the house, but what if you hate your job now and we need to move, right? Well, what is our option if we can't sell it because we're underwater? Then let's at least look at what the mortgage payment is, and is that commensurate to what we could rent that place out for? So when you're looking at these mortgage rates, compare it to what would that place actually rent out for in a situation, because if your mortgage payment is for $4,500 per month, but the place would only rent out for $3,500 per month, well, now it's something to consider, because now you're taking a little bit more risk by this house purchase, because even though it might fit into your budget, it may be a lot harder to offload, or to be stuck in that situation if we're not thinking about that. So just something to be thinking about as we're considering the affordability from the monthly payment standpoint as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really helpful to kind of break down the like down payment and the monthly payment and everything. You also said at the beginning about, two questions to ask before you buy that new house. So what are these two questions?
Absolutely. These are some questions that not everybody's going to be asking you, right? And so the first question is this the right time? Right. And not many people, the reason why I say not many people are going to be asking you that is because most people that you're talking to about a house purchase are financially incentivized and motivated to help you make that decision as soon as possible, right? And help
Sure.
move you forward in that situation. And it's not saying that they're bad people. It's just that they do have an innate bias in that situation. And so we have to, take a step back and say, all right, is this actually the right time for you and your family? And oftentimes it is. And maybe it's, not a decision of, hey, this is where interest rates are at, or this is where housing prices. If it can fit into your budget and you have, you hit both of the, affordability metrics, it can still be the right time, right? Even if it's with seemingly high interest rates or things like that. But play devil's advocate for a minute and say, all right, is this really the right time for our family? And maybe, we're not having kids, we don't have kids yet, and we want to have like a kind of an intermediary home, and then a couple years later we'll buy the big home. Well, maybe is it time to just rent for another couple of years and then get the big home, the other home that we want later on? Is that the right time? But some crazy study that I saw just recently is that it said that it's actually cheaper to rent than to buy in all 50 of the major cities in the country right now.
Oh
And
gosh.
so I thought that was crazy. And so it's just looking at across the board, and like all even the top 5 U.S. metros with the smallest cost difference between those is like Detroit is like 2% different, and then but like the fifth on that list is Buffalo, and it's still a 20%. It's 20% cheaper to rent than it is to buy in a place like that. And so sometimes there's maybe cheaper for you short term if it's not the right time for you and your family too, in the rent. It seems like we're throwing money out the window. There's a lot of I talk to any homeowner and they'll tell you how many other costs go into being a homeowner than just, renting for a little bit as well. And then the other question that I always like to ask is this a rushed financial decision? Right. And kind of the old proverb says, like, he who hurries his footsteps errs, right? Or haste makes waste is what we say on our team. If we try to make a hasty decision, sometimes it's not usually a good one, right? If we're rushing through that. And so are you feeling rushed in this decision? And sometimes if you are feeling rushed, taking a pullback for a second to look holistically at the decision is going to be healthy. Because anytime you're making a rush decision, as a general rule, it's not oftentimes you're at a lot higher probability of making a faulty financial decision. And so the longer the time frame the longer the perspective that we can have with the decision, the more higher the probability it's going to be a good decision for you long term. And so make sure that we're not making a 30-year commitment for a 2-year difficulty, right? Or a 2-year, time frame on that. And so we just want to be thinking about how rushed are we in this decision? Are we zooming out? Are we playing devil's advocate? And are we not just talking to all the hype men trying to hype us up to make this decision as fast as possible?
Yeah, that's really helpful and kind of something to think about before, you make that big house purchase. Well, thank you again, Michael, for coming onto our podcast. Again, I think this is great information for our listeners. If they wanted to reach out to you or have questions for you, can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So feel free if you have questions. We'd love to come alongside you. I know sometimes just the house purchase is the catalyst for a lot of other financial questions that come up through big transitions, and so we'd be more than happy to help out. And so feel free to reach out to our team. Our email is FoleyTeam, FOLEYTEAM @northstarfinancial.com. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to take care of you.
All right, so that brings us to the end of this podcast. So once again, this is Faye, and this has been Creogs Over Coffee.
So guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, head over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, whatever your podcatcher is, give us a 5-star rating and review.
You can find us on social media on X at Creogs Over Coffee 1, on Facebook and Instagram at Creogs Over Coffee. And if you want to donate to the show, go ahead and go over to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/CreogsOverCoffee.
You can find show notes for this episode and all of our previous episodes on our website, creogsovercoffee.com.
And if you want to reach out to us, have a question about the show, have ideas for an episode or a correction for us, go ahead and email us, creogsovercoffee@gmail.com.